Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be talking about the formation of the medieval kingdom of Croatia. Now, if you watched my previous video, we discussed a little bit about the different theories surrounding who the Croatians were, how the Croatian nation formed in the early Middle Ages, the Croatian ethnogenesis, and so forth, all the different theories about who the original Croats were and so forth. So if you have not seen that video, it might be worthwhile to do that before you watch this video. But nevertheless, what happens in this early medieval period, certainly by at least the 7th century, is that the Croatians, the Croats, will come to control large portions of the Western Balkans. Here we're talking about the regions of Croatia proper, Dalmatia, Istria, Slavonia, portions of the Pannonian Plain, and Western Bosnia. So if we take a look at this map here, we can see the 4 historic regions of Croatia. Now, this isn't a perfect example of kind of what these regions and their borders meant during the early medieval period, since this is a map of the modern Republic of Croatia, but nevertheless, at least you can get a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we're referencing these 4 historic regions. So if you look at the map in red there, kind of in the heart of Croatia, that is Croatia proper. To the south of the red area, south of Croatia proper, we'll see kind of the coastline area in blue. That is Dalmatia, the region of Dalmatia. That is where these cities, which we'll be referencing, such as Dubrovnik, Zadar, Split, that's where those cities will be located in the Dalmatian region. If we kind of go up north, up the coast a little bit, north of Dalmatia, we'll see that little green triangular area kind of tucked between Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia proper. That is the region of Istria. And then finally, the 4th region is the purple region laying to the east of Croatia proper in purple there, and that is Slavonia. And Slavonia is not to be confused with the country of Slovenia. Slovenia is the independent country to the west, to the northwest of Croatia proper. Slavonia is a region, again, of Croatia located to the east of Croatia proper, there in purple. Now, when we talk about the Pannonian region, we're really talking about kind of the northern portions of Slavonia, northern portions of Croatia proper, but mainly the region of Pannonia is encompassed by the modern-day Republic of Hungary, which is the country on the map north of Slavonia and Croatia proper to the east of Slovenia. And then south of Slavonia, kind of tucked between Slavonia and Dalmatia, is the country of Bosnia. So when we're referring to all these different regions, whether it's Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, Pannonia, you can kind of get a general idea based on this map of kind of the regions that we're talking about. Now, although we have these 4 historic regions of Croatia, during the early medieval period, we really see the region of Croatia divided between 2 general zones. To the north, you have what historians refer to as Pannonian Croatia, which really refers to not just the Pannonian Plain, but also to large portions of the Croatian interior. And then to the south, we have Dalmatian Croatia, which is the region of Dalmatia and the Adriatic coast. Now, the reason why historians kind of divide early medieval Croatian into these 2 zones, Pannonian and Dalmatian Croatia, is really because they have different rulers, different noble hierarchies, different administrations, and so forth. So that is why, as we'll go forward, we'll see references to a separate Pannonian Croatia and to a separate Dalmatian Croatia. But it gets a little bit more complicated, as well as we'll see that not only are there 2 zones of Croatia, but Croatia as a whole is really divided into what we would call counties, known as župas, and each county is ruled by a count or a kind of noble lord known as a župan. And these are basically kind of self-contained administrative regions, counties, like I said. And the Byzantine sources, specifically Constantine Porphyrogenitus, the 10th century Roman emperor, cites around 11 different župas within the region under Croat control. As we discussed in the previous video, prior to the Croat and the Serb arrival to the Western Balkans, that region was mainly dominated by the Avars, who controlled, like I said, large portions of the Western Balkans, certainly most of the Pannonian Plain and so forth. But as, again, the Croats specifically moved in and came into conflict with the Avars started diminishing in power as the Croatians started establishing their control over large portions, again, of those regions of the Western Balkans and the Pannonian Plain. However, regardless of this rise of Croatian and Serbian power in the Western Balkans, the Avars still kind of continued to be a player in the region. They didn't disappear completely. They're still around through large portions of the 8th century. However, by the end of the 8th century, we will see a total collapse of Avar power in that region, as we see a new power, a new player moving into the Balkans, into the Pannonian Plain, and that is the Franks, the Frankish Empire, under the reign of Charlemagne or Charles the Great. By 791, we see a very strong Frankish presence in the region, and in that same year, 791, we will see Charlemagne launch his first campaign against the Pannonian Avars to crush them and take control of the Pannonian region to start pushing into the Western Balkans. That first campaign isn't totally successful, so Charlemagne launches a subsequent campaign, a second campaign, a few years later in 795, which does crush the Avars and completely removes them as a force, as a political player in the Western Balkans, in the Pannonian Plain. Now, after the Avar Khaganate is destroyed by the Franks, a lot of the leaders, the Avar leaders, which also include Bulgars as well, will flee Pannonia, will go east and seek refuge in Bulgaria. Actually, one of the Bulgarian chieftains who fled Pannonia is believed to be the legendary Bulgar leader Krum. So we do see, again, a movement of the Avar and Bulgar hierarchy out of the Pannonian Plain, kind of going into Bulgaria to flee the Franks and so forth. Now, once Charlemagne establishes control over the Pannonian region and starts pushing into the Western Balkans, we see various Croat nobles forming allegiances. For example, we see the Croatian prince Vojnomir pledging allegiance to Charlemagne, and Vojnomir is the prince of the Croats in Pannonia and Slavonia. He does not have any control over the region of Dalmatia. This is kind of, again, his zone is the Pannonian Croatia, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So that's kind of how things are playing out towards the end of the 8th century with the arrival of the Franks. Now, in the year 800, I believe on Christmas Day, 800, Pope Leo III will crown Charlemagne as emperor. Now, this designation as emperor causes quite a bit of controversy within the medieval Balkans. Specifically, this title of Charlemagne as emperor comes into conflict with the Byzantines, as the Byzantines view the Pope crowning Charlemagne as emperor to be an attack on the imperial legitimacy of Byzantium, basically. And we've talked about this in the past, but the Roman conception of empire is that there can only be one empire, the Roman Empire, and only one emperor, the Roman Emperor. So if you have a Byzantine emperor and a Western Frankish emperor, Charlemagne, that puts the legitimacy of Byzantium into question. Therefore, we can see here that the Franks and the Byzantines will be kind of fighting for the legitimacy of being the successor of the true Rome, if you will. So we'll see that as the Franks challenge the Byzantines as the true successors of the Roman Empire, Croatia will essentially be the middle of this dispute. That's kind of where these two forces will kind of meet, and Croatia, again, will be in the middle of this conflict. Almost immediately after Charlemagne is crowned emperor by Pope Leo III, we will see that the Franks under Charlemagne start pushing even further into the Croatian territories, specifically into Croatian Dalmatia. Here we'll see kind of the same scenario play out that we saw in the north in the Pannonian portion of Croatia, and that is that the Croatian prince Vyacheslav, who is the ruler of Dalmatian Croatia, will pledge allegiance to Charlemagne, and thus Charlemagne by this point manages to secure Croat loyalty, both in the north in the Pannonian region and in the south in the Dalmatian region, and rules both Croat principalities. Now, by 812, we will see the Franks and the Byzantines sort out this imperial dispute. There's a treaty signed, a Frankish-Byzantine treaty signed that year in 812, which recognizes Charlemagne as an emperor, but as the emperor of the Franks, not as the emperor of the Romans. This is a Byzantine compromise, which we saw also with Tsar Simeon the Great in Bulgaria, where Tsar Simeon wanted to be recognized as a Roman emperor. The Byzantines obviously did not allow that, and so they compromised with him, granting him the title of Emperor of the Bulgars. So we see here that the tension is relieved a little bit between the Byzantine Empire and the Frankish Empire, and in exchange for this imperial recognition of Charlemagne, he is supposed to return the Dalmatian coastal cities back to Byzantium, to Byzantine control. These cities, such as Dubrovnik, Split, Zadar, always retained their Roman or Byzantine character. Those cities never fell to the Slavs. They are very well fortified, were very well fortified, constantly under Slavic attack, Slavic siege, but they always managed to hold out and, again, retain their Roman character. Now, if we move forward a couple years, we see that Charlemagne dies in the year 814, and once Charlemagne dies, the Croatian nobles at this point see an opportunity for independence and start agitating for liberation from the Frankish Empire. In 819, Ludovit, the prince of the Pannonian Croatians, he will launch kind of one of the first major uprisings against the Franks to push them out of the Croatian regions. However, this revolt, this uprising, is not successful, and Ludovit is forced to flee into exile. I think he flees into Dalmatia. Specifically, I think, I'm not sure about this, I might be wrong, but I think he flees kind of further south into the Serbian-controlled parts of Dalmatia and seeks protection from some of the Serbian tribes down there. Ultimately, however, he will be murdered while in exile. Now, although this uprising in 819 failed, it did have some interesting consequences for the region, and that really starts with the Timok Slavs. The Timok Slavs are the Slavs that settled around the Timok River region. The Timok River divides the modern, at least in part, divides the modern republics of Serbia and Bulgaria, so it's pretty far to the east of the general Croatian lands. However, these Timok Slavs did participate in Ludovit's uprising in 819. So as retribution, as punishment for their participation in this anti-Frankish uprising, the Franks will move east into this Timok region and attempt to conquer that region and subjugate the Timok Slavs who live there. Now, this move greatly upsets the Bulgars, the Bulgarian Empire, as they view the Timok region to be Bulgarian territory and the Timok Slavs to be Bulgar subjects. So there's a conflict that starts occurring here between the Franks and the Bulgars, and in 824 to 826, the Bulgarians, now under the rule of Omertag, begin to open up communication with the Franks. Omertag sends diplomats and emissaries to the Franks to see if they can settle this border dispute without having to go to war, basically, to see if there's some sort of compromise they can make that both sides are agreeable with. However, after a couple of years, Omertag starts getting very impatient with the lack of progress from the Frankish side on this Frankish-Bulgarian border dispute. So in 827, we'll see Omertag launch a large-scale campaign to the west to push the Franks out of the Bulgar territory, out of the Timok region, and this is very much successful. The Bulgar forces do push the Franks out of the Timok region, and in fact start pushing even further west. The Bulgarians start taking the cities of Belgrade and Sirmium, or the modern-day city of Sremska Mitrovica in northwest Serbia. the Bulgars do not stop there. They continue pushing west and even penetrate into Pannonia and take control of what was previously Frankish territory. So this Frankish expansion to the east really backfires on the Franks as they kind of invite the Bulgarians into their territory and begin losing large portions of their territory to Omertag. These Bulgar campaigns into Frankish-controlled Croatia will continue well into the middle of the 9th century. Although in, I believe, 845, there is a treaty signed between the Franks and the Bulgars, if I'm not mistaken, which returns large portions of the Pannonian region back to the Franks. However, 10 years later, in 855, we will see the hostilities kind of renewed, where Boris I starts launching campaigns into the region of Dalmatia. So we see that this push of the Franks east into the Timok region, antagonizing the Bulgars, really did not work out well for them, as they kind of opened up a can of worms that they could not really handle, so to speak. Now, the middle of the 9th century is a very chaotic and hectic period in medieval Croatia. Not only do we have the Bulgarians coming in from the east and trying to take over these Frankish-controlled regions in Croatia, but we're also seeing around the same period of time that the Arabs are moving in quite heavily into the Adriatic region, and they are really dominating the Adriatic Sea. They are raiding the Dalmatian coast. They're raiding the Italian coast of the Adriatic. They're sieging various cities. Dubrovnik, for example, I believe in the year 867, is sieged by the Arabs. So this is kind of really devastating, not only for the Roman coastal cities, but also for the Croatian rulers, for the Slavic tribes that live in the Dalmatian region, and so forth. So as the Arabs begin sieging these coastal cities in Dalmatia, we see cities like Dubrovnik begging the Byzantines for help. Again, these are really Roman cities who are generally have been loyal to Byzantium, so they reach out to the Byzantines, specifically to Emperor Basil I, who does respond by sending a fleet, Byzantine naval fleet, to rescue the city of Dubrovnik. Now, the Byzantine support really comes in exchange for direct loyalty to the empire. Not only do the coastal cities like Dubrovnik pledge direct allegiance to Byzantium, but we even see the Slavic tribes pledging their allegiances to the Byzantine emperor. Basically, what Basil I did here was pay tribute to the Slavic tribes who had continuously been trying to siege these various coastal cities from the Croatian interior. They're kind of paid off by the Byzantines in order to bring them under Byzantine control, which does work. The Slavs pretty much stop trying to take these coastal cities. They swear allegiance to the Byzantines. They join the Byzantine navy and begin liberating Italian ports, Croatian ports, and clearing the Adriatic of the Arab presence. It's not just that the Slavs are joining the Byzantine navy, which at this point is operating out of the city of Durazzo, or the modern-day city of Durrës in Albania, but the Slavs themselves have their own navy, obviously not as superior or not as sophisticated as the Byzantine or the Arab navy, but the Slavs do have naval vessels. We also saw this when we were talking about the Slavic presence in Macedonia, where we saw Slavic pirates operating in the Aegean Sea. So the Slavs did have some naval capabilities, but nevertheless, that is what occurs with Byzantine support. The area, the Adriatic region, is cleared of these Arab raiders, and by the 870s, this whole region is pretty much stabilized by the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantines, having stabilized the region, established the theme of Dalmatia in the 870s, which really comprises the Dalmatian coast and the islands off the Dalmatian coast in the Adriatic. Now, what's important to know here is that although the Byzantines technically now control the Dalmatian region directly, they really take a hands-off approach to governance of Dalmatia. There's not a whole lot of direct involvement by the Byzantines in Dalmatian administration. Especially after this Arab threat was handled, after the Arab raiders were dealt with, the Byzantines really didn't have a whole lot of interest in that region, and we see not that they didn't have interest, but the threat to Byzantine interests in that region declines dramatically, and we see the Byzantines kind of pull away from the Dalmatian region, basically leaving it to the Croatians to administer themselves. A lot of these coastal cities, like I said, are left to administer themselves independently. And not only are they administering themselves independently, but there's really not a whole lot of cooperation or communication between the cities themselves. Each city has its own military, it has its own administration, has its own laws. Basically, these Dalmatian cities in the late 9th century are operating, in my opinion, quite similarly to ancient Greek city-states. They're kind of operating completely independently of one another and have their own internal systems. So really at this point, there's virtually no Byzantine administration in Dalmatia, which is quite unique for a Byzantine theme. It's probably one of the most independent Byzantine themes from what we can tell. So again, the Dalmatian region at this point in time, by the 870s, is technically under Byzantine control. There is de jure Byzantine control. However, de facto, it is under the rule of the Croatians. Now, as I said, the Byzantines technically are in control of Dalmatia. However, despite this fact, despite the creation, I should say, of the theme of Dalmatia by the Byzantines, the Frankish Empire is still asserting its claims over the region. There is conflicting territorial claims here, overlapping territorial claims occurring in Dalmatia, specifically at this time. Again, Byzantine-controlled coastal cities, Croatian nobles, the Frankish Empire. We see kind of, again, overlapping claims over this region. However, as we discussed in the years prior to the formation of the Dalmatian theme, in the middle of the 9th century, we saw a great decrease in the Frankish influence in Dalmatia. We see a decline in Frankish power in the region. However, this creation of the Byzantine theme kind of renews the Franks' desire to regain control of Dalmatia. They see this Byzantine incursion into what they feel is their territory as a threat to their empire. So the Franks, we see kind of in the late 9th century, begin reasserting their attempts to dominate the Dalmatian region. However, these Frankish attempts to regain control of Dalmatia and reassert their authority there really lead to a lot of discontent among the Croatians. And after a few years, in 876, we will see that the Dalmatian Croatians, now under the rule of Prince Domagoj, will launch an uprising against the Franks. This will be a successful uprising, and Domagoj will push the Franks out of Dalmatia. Not only that, but Domagoj starts pushing even further north up the coast, trying to liberate Istria. However, he is stopped. He is stopped by Venetian forces who prevent the Croatians from taking Istria. So at this point in time, we see kind of a growth of really Croatian power in Dalmatia. We see the Croatians formalizing their control of the region. And by this point, we see that the Dalmatian Croatians are really an independent force in the Western Balkans. They have freed themselves de facto from all foreign rule and now are under their own prince, their own monarch. And the Croatians, aside from, again, these walled, fortified cities, which are still loyal to the Byzantines, aside from those coastal fortified cities, the Croatians will control pretty much the entire Dalmatian coast. In fact, 3 years later, in 897, the Pope will recognize the Dalmatian Croatians as independent. The Pope will recognize Dalmatian Croatia as an independent and legitimate state. After a series of different rulers, from the end of the 9th into the early 10th century. Like I said, we'll see different rulers, but in 910, we will see the Dalmatian region of Croatia come under the rule of a noble named Tomislav. And Tomislav is very important in Croatian history, and one of the, as we'll see, and one of the first things he does, one of his first actions, major actions, is to strengthen the military force of the Dalmatian Croatians. At this point in time, the Hungarians have started moving into the Pannonian Plain and begin pushing into the Pannonian region of Croatia and begin raiding the Croatian territory there. Now, the Pannonian Croatians are technically under Frankish rule still, as opposed to the Dalmatians, who have thrown off Frankish rule. The Pannonian Croatians, like I said, are technically de jure under Frankish rule. However, they don't really want to appeal to the Franks for help against the Hungarians. They don't really want to trade Hungarian rule for Frankish rule. So what they do is the Pannonian Croatians start begging Tomislav for help. And Tomislav does respond. He begins moving this very large army, which he has created, north into the Pannonian region and begins campaigning against the Hungarians and does push them out, pushes them out of the Pannonian region of Croatia. After several victories against the Hungarians, Tomislav does establish a stable border between Croatia and Hungary, and that will be essentially the Drava River. And at this point in time, Tomislav, now having kind of moved into the Pannonian region, does unite all the Croatian lands, Pannonian and Dalmatian, under his rule and eliminated any Frankish rule over Croatia. So at this point in time, for the first time in history, Croatia is unified under a single leader, Tomislav. And by 925, Tomislav is, or I should say Croatia, is recognized as a kingdom, and that kingdom will be ruled over by Tomislav as its first king. I will now put up a map on the screen so you can kind of see what this kingdom of Croatia looked like around the year 925. Now, if you're wondering why I did not discuss the conflict, the war that occurred between Tomislav and Tsar Simeon the Great of Bulgaria in the early 920s, it is not because I didn't want to talk about it or I forgot about it, but it is because we already discussed that conflict in my video on Tsar Simeon the Great, the second video in the two-part series on Tsar Simeon, which we discussed in that video, the various military campaigns that Simeon was engaged in, his quest to become the Roman emperor, his essentially bringing the Bulgarian Empire to its peak, to its most glorious point, if you will. So if you want to know more about that conflict between Tomislav and Simeon, check out that video. I will post a link to it in the description. There was actually, while I'm on the topic, a pretty big drop-off between the first video on Tsar Simeon and the second video on Tsar Simeon. I think that might be because I used the same thumbnail picture for that video, and I'm guessing a lot of people didn't realize there was actually a second video. They just assumed it was the same video since the thumbnail image was the same. In the first video, we discussed kind of the cultural development in the first Bulgarian Empire under Tsar Simeon, the kind of strengthening of the formalization, the crystallization of the Bulgarian ethnogenesis during the reign of Simeon. But like I said in the second part, we discussed more of the military aspects of Tsar Simeon's reign in Bulgaria. So please check out that video if you have not done so already. Again, there'll be a link in the description to that video. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a little bit about how the early medieval kingdom of Croatia kind of took form and what the steps were to that process, to the formation of a unified, independent kingdom of Croatia under the rule of King Tomislav. So with that being said, we'll be back next week with some more early medieval history in the Balkans. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.